Deborah, are you ready to introduce our speakers?
Sure, whenever you are.
Let's do it.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our lunch, to the home visiting work group, Lunch and Learn, Ventilation and Indoor Air Quality for Health and Safety by Paul Bemis and Chris Ames of Air Cleaners, Inc. I'm Dr. Deborah Weiss. I'm the co-chair of the Florida Asthma Coalition, and I helped to start the Lunch and Learn series last year. It seems to be quite popular. And I guess bring your own lunch. We can't unfortunately serve any lunch on the Zoom platform. And I hope you enjoy this presentation. So I want to tell you a little bit about our presenters. Paul Bemis is the president and CEO of Air Cleaners, Inc. And he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the team with over 30 years of involvement in the high technology market, including many years at Hewlett-Packard. Paul's unique background and education provide an exceptional basis for the pursuit of new and creative ways to apply complex and to solve complex engineering simulation problems. Chris Ames is the co-founder and COO of Air Cleaners, Inc. Chris has decades of experience working with mission-critical facilities and data center infrastructure and systems, including many years at industry leader Emerson Network Power. He has served as trusted advisor to dozens of mission-critical sector clients, including hospitals, military, national security, finance, and federal, state, and county security and emergency services organizations.
There were people on their computers and stuff.
Did you mute yourself, folks? You can learn more about Paul and Chris and their company, Air Cleaners, Inc. at their website, www.aircleanersinc.com. And now, without further ado, I turn you over to our presenters.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. And yeah, this is a very valuable time. We appreciate the opportunity to go over some things that we've learned in our time working with Airflow, and specifically over the last couple of years. Today, what's going to happen is Paul's going to make the presentation, and I'll be responding to people's questions via chat. So if you ask your questions via chat, whenever they come up, if it's appropriate, I'll jump in and ask Paul to please respond. If not, then we'll cover all of them towards the end. I've put a list of the questions that were in the invitation in the chat box for us to review. We will cover most of those. If we don't, please ask questions. And it's a list that I think is worth people considering as they go forward. I also want to be clear, Paul and I are available, and our emails will be at the end, and really appreciate the interaction. So please don't hesitate to connect with us via email or on our website as you have questions going forward. Thank you very much for your time again, and I'll hand it over to Paul. Thank you very much for doing this, Paul.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to start off talking about indoor air quality in general. What is indoor air quality? The whole air quality movement really started around outdoor. Interesting enough, you'll notice we have an outdoor air quality standard, but we do not have an indoor air quality standard. And that has been helpful to have an outdoor air quality standard. It relates to the levels of contaminants that are in the atmosphere. And there is an issue and a criteria for what we call acceptable indoor air quality. It is somewhat subjective and also objective, and it affects our beliefs about the costs and benefits of indoor air quality. I want to point out as well that the reason that this is such an important topic is that as humans, we spend up to 95% of our time indoors. Even more, I would argue recently, we are indoors. This is not natural for us as people. We have evolved to be primarily outdoors as evolutionarily speaking. And so the indoor situation that we faced in the past couple hundred years is not natural to us as humans. So what are contaminants and sources? Well, there are a number of them. And you know, there's things like CO2 and refrigerants that displace oxygen. There's toxic gases. What we're going to be talking about, however, today is really in this category. It's allergens and pathogens. It's the really small stuff that bothers us. Bothers us in terms of our human health. COVID is, of course, a pathogen. It's not the only one, but there are many in this category. Allergens that bother us. These are also triggers for asthma. So it's really these and this group that we're going to be talking about today. Sources of them, of course, outdoor include general air pollution, the California fires, for example, or pollution in the streets. You noticed yesterday in the news that the Biden administration is going to increase the requirements, the standards, giving back California control over particulate in the air from diesel engines. Automobiles in general are a great polluter, very small particles. Indoors, we have building materials, furnishings, we have mold spores, which are very small. We have combustion from cooking, from cleaning, from heating, and we have occupants. And the occupants are producing a particulate as well. And we'll get into that a little bit more in terms of pathogen transmission. So let me talk about the size of these particles because it is important to us. You'll notice here in this illustration, this is actually an EPA illustration, but it's showing a human hair here, and you see my cursor going back and forth across this human hair. So that's the width of a human hair in terms of scale. The particles that we're most concerned about are called 2.5 or PM 2.5. PM just stands for particle matter, 2.5 is the size, microns, so 2.5 microns. So the ones we're worried about are up here, these little red ones. In fact, it's about the size of my cursor. So this gives you a relative comparison of the size of the particle we're most concerned about compared to a human hair. It just gives you a relative comparison. And the ones that are really small are the most dangerous because they go deepest into our lung and affect our physiology most dramatically. They're a straight shot to the bloodstream, and that is not a good thing for us as humans. Now, the WHO has been focused on this, and PM 2.5 came from really outdoor air pollution particulate measurement, but is being used as well for all particulate. It's the little stuff you're worried about, and they've just reduced this number to a smaller number. We're down now at 15 micrograms per cubic meter. This is a density. This is the acceptable level of small particulate in the environment that's going to be now a new standard. So they're tightening these things up. They go up, PM10 is a little bigger, that's a 10 micron particle. We do better with those because first of all, they fall to the ground a little more effectively due to gravity. And second of all, our systems catch them easier, most notably our trachea and the fibers inside of our throat and also our lungs catch them a little easier than the 2.5. The 2.5 particles are the ones that cause us the most trouble. And they are also, by the way, the ones that are transmitting COVID. The effects of indoor exposure are pretty obvious. For us, the ones that we're concerned about today are in here. Allergy, asthma, infection, transmission of a pathogen, such as COVID or the common cold. And there's also a comfort component here as well. Perceived air quality is something that people can experience being in an indoor environment. We've all heard about sick building syndrome symptoms, which are an indoor air quality issue. And it does affect a broad output of human activity, productivity being the biggest and most important. Cognitive function can be measured as the indoor air quality declines, the cognitive response declines with it. So our ability to learn, our ability to be productive is directly tied to indoor air quality. Now, what's happened, of course, is COVID has focused our attention on this like never before because the dominant transmission medium for COVID-19 is airborne, and it is very small particles, 2.5 and below, and they float in the air on thermal currents. But it has been a vehicle, a lever, to raise more general questions about what is acceptable in terms of indoor air quality. So it's good for us all, whether those of you in the audience are suffering from things like asthma triggers or serious allergies. This has been good for you in general because it's raised the awareness of the need for better indoor air quality. And quite frankly, it's been ignored. We've known it for quite some time, but it has been ignored. Now, there is an organization that I am affiliated with, ASHRAE, ASHRAE is a standards body, an organization with about 30,000 members worldwide, who focuses on what we call the built environment, buildings, homes, any things that humans live in. The acronym stands for the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. It's an old acronym. It's been around since the early 1900s when we first invented refrigeration. And they've continued to work on acceptable indoor air quality. This particular standard that I'm showing here in the slide over on the right was actually developed quite some time ago, and this one is a 2019 edition of it. So it started off in about 2016 and has continued, and they've developed acceptable ventilation standards for indoor air quality. And it's held up fairly well over the years and still does. Now, there's also this opportunity for, as I mentioned, productivity improvement. As the air quality gets better, humans become more productive because they're just more comfortable. There's more oxygen for our brains. We think better. And the upside opportunity is highlighted here in this table. This is an older table. This is actually done some time ago. So these numbers are much bigger now. But look at the upside opportunity for savings and productivity improvement in the billions of dollars, 10 to 30 billion, 20 to 160 billion. You can search on this and find studies that show the upside opportunity for productivity improvement in the workplace is extremely high with good indoor air quality. So you would think this would be enough motivation by itself. This in the center, we're talking here about the costs associated with poor indoor air quality. We have issues related to asthma, sickness. We have sick building syndrome. We have transmission of airborne diseases and colds and flu. Those are the cost savings, but the productivity gains are getting a lot of attention right now, because if you're an organization that relies on productivity improvements, then the opportunity for you to do much better with clean indoor air outweighs many, many factors in the building cost, including the cost of energy to drive it itself. So it's a big one. And the studies have shown, and there've been a number of them that have shown, that as the ventilation rate here is along this axis, as the ventilation rate increases, the relative performance of us as humans goes up really quickly, really fast. So the more fresh air or clean air, either one, you can either filter it or you can clean it, doesn't matter. They're both effective. The more ventilation you have, the better the productivity is. No question about it. And we just reviewed a study that by Lawrence Berkeley Labs that was focused on California schools, and they measured a bunch of California schools, elementary schools, and found a direct correlation here between good outdoor air. In this case, they were using outdoor air and productivity improvements. They tested it. They're not the only ones. Harvard has done these studies as well. It's well established. Now, the attention is all most recently, of course, due to COVID, been focused on infection control. And that's in the same area. It's still indoor air. And we are looking at infection. And it has taken a while for people to understand how COVID-19 was transmitted. So some of the things we've learned from the pandemic is that airborne transmission of these infections occurs. That was debated early on by both the WHO and CDC, but it occurs and it is dominant. The dominant transmission for COVID-19, as well as probably all the others, including the common flu, the common cold, is airborne. And this dispels some long-held ideas about how these are transmitted, these diseases are transmitted, or these viruses are transmitted. You remember early on, it was all about touch. It was all about, clean everything and wipe it down and don't touch. And what about our groceries coming home? There was all kinds of sensitivity around touch, direct or indirect. Either you're touching someone directly or something directly or indirect. But all confirmed cases have occurred indoors. There have been no outdoor cases at all, which argues that it's not just touch, because we're touching outside as well. And HVAC systems play an important role in this indoor airborne risk mitigation factor. But I want to point out, having been in the business for over 20 years, HVAC systems in general, which again stands for heating, ventilation, air conditioning, mostly related to forced air systems, which many of us have in our homes and in our buildings. were not designed for pathogen mitigation. They were designed for thermal control. That's really it. We've been controlling the thermal environment, so it's the right temperature, and along with that, we get the right humidity. We've been controlling the temperature and humidity quite well. We do that well. What we don't do well is mitigate the transmission of pathogen, because it's never been a criteria. So the whole HVAC industry was never positioned to be focused on pathogen mitigation until COVID-19 came along. Now, it can play an important role, as this slide points out, but in many cases, it's simply not set up to do it well. Existing buildings, therefore, don't provide a lot of protection, particularly if you don't own them. If you're renting or leasing a space in a building, you don't have control over the HVAC system. You don't know what's going on. It is what it is. And so they don't generally provide a lot of protection, and they have historically not been focused on this. And the knowledge about the importance of this came late in the sequence. Again, the CDC and WHO didn't really recognize it until we got well into 2022, late 2021, early 2022. They stood up and said, yes, it is airborne.
Well, would you, excuse me, would you just clarify, am I understanding you correctly, that what we've learned from the pandemic, anything that we do to reduce airborne transmission of COVID is also directly beneficial for any other airborne transmission of any other pathogen and other allergens or asthma triggers for this particular audience?
Exactly. That is exactly correct, Chris, because they hang around the same size. What we're talking about is an airborne particle, a small particle. Now, that particle can carry COVID-19, it can carry the common cold, it can carry the common flu, it can carry many things. But it also, just by itself, is a dominant trigger for asthma and allergies. So by reducing the particle count, by getting the PM 2.5 count down in an indoor environment, we satisfy multiple criteria. We reduce transmission, the potential for transmission. We reduce the triggers for allergies and asthma at the same time.
Okay,
So
thank
yes,
you.
the answer is yes. Now I'm going to be showing you a lot of what we call CFD animations, CFD models. We're modelers here. We do a lot of CFD, and it stands for computational fluid dynamics. We're going to model airflow here. And we're able to do this using computer simulation. It has been validated in the aerospace and the automotive industry for well over 30 years. And I am an expert in CFD modeling. So here we're going to show you a model of particles coming out of someone's mouth. This is been validated in the laboratory that this is what occurs. What the CFD software allows you to do is visualize it. So we're visualizing someone talking while they're standing there speaking, and you can see that cloud of particles coming out of their mouth. You'll also notice they start floating up. So this is quite typical that our bodies operate at around 98.6 Fahrenheit. And when we speak, particles come out of our mouth and float up. And they will eventually fill the room. You can think of it as a smoker. If any of you are old enough to remember the old smoking days, people would light up a cigarette inside an environment, inside a building or a room, and the smoke would rise and finally accumulate in the ceiling and work its way down until the entire room was gray. Same effect here, except it's a deadly pathogen instead of just a cigarette. Now, what happens in a room, I'm going to show you some more animation here. This is actually a case. This was a case that was well documented. This is one of the first super spreader events that occurred. This occurred in Wuhan, China. I'm going to show you the animation sequence from here. I am going to stop it and show you what's going on first. So here we have, sitting over on the left-hand side of this restaurant, the emitter. We call this the index case. So this is the person who has COVID-19 and they're breathing. And again, you see that going up into the top of the room and bouncing and beginning to be mixed. So red is bad. Red is the highest concentration of the pathogen coming out of their mouth. Over here on the right-hand side, we have the air conditioning units. These are recirculatory in nature. They don't do much filtering. This is very, very common that you have what we call a fan and a coil. A fan coil, and all it is just a cooling coil with a fan blowing air by it, and it circulates. Very much like an air conditioner you have in your home or in many buildings where they don't bring in outside air, they're just conditioning it. Remember, I told you earlier, it was a thermal issue. So if you can get the temperature right, everybody should be happy. Not quite so much, because this pathogen and this airflow from this device tends to spread it. Now, these people in red here did get COVID-19. So there was a number of them here who contracted the disease after being at this restaurant. where people over here did not. And if you watch this sequence, you can see why. And the people who did this work went into the restaurant and modeled it and came up with this output. And you notice that over here, remember, red's bad. So it's getting mixed into this environment and creating an entire area over here on this side where the pathogen has a high enough concentration, because it is a density issue, high enough concentration to make these people ill. And these are the ones who caught it. It was the first time we had the opportunity to actually go in and scientifically measure and document what was going on, and then be able to correlate the simulation to actually the people who became infected. So very important piece of work done there. And you can use, of course, CFD to visualize it. CFD gives you the opportunity to see it. And that's why it's significant. Now, we have another one here. This is a typical office environment. And this one I'm going to show you as well. I'm going to show you this in what we call a 3D visualization. It's a static image, but I get to manipulate it and rotate it. And what you'll see here is that, again, these are cooling units at the top. You see them up in the ceiling. So many of you in your environments that you're in, particularly work environments, will look up and see these devices in the ceiling that are returning and supplying air. But you notice it's not uniform. So the air is moved around the room by the location of the vent and its flow rate, the speed at which the air is coming out. And you notice there's not a lot of uniformity there. These typically get placed just anywhere. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to placement of these devices historically. They're just put in the ceiling. It's often done based on lowest cost. So the HVAC person will put them in wherever it's the lowest cost. And what this causes is a non-uniformity of air in the room, both thermal, but more importantly, particulate. And what you'll see in a room like this is a very uneven sequence. And here's a still of it here. You can see those air jets coming out, and it causes it to be uneven. And the result is, if we looked at the air distribution in the room as a function of color, which I'm doing here, so if it's blue, it means that there is very high concentration of particulate. And if it's red, it means that there is low concentration. And you should see a uniform color here. If the room was evenly distributed with air, everything in there would be the same color. But you see there's these pockets. Now, these pockets are the same ones that we all have in our homes where all the dust collects. Most of us know in our homes or the place that we're renting or wherever we live, where the dust accumulates. This is the place it accumulates. It's called a low pressure area. It's where all the particulate loads up. Now, that's a bad thing if there's COVID in the atmosphere, because if you're over in this area and you're breathing, that means the density, concentration of the pathogen will be highest in that region. And as we move up in the room, you see I'm walking up. I'm just slicing the room in a vertical direction. And as you see, you move up, it gets worse because, of course, the pathogens all float near the ceiling. So one of the problems in buildings, just to summarize here, is that the air is not distributed evenly throughout the room. It just happens to be the nature of the way they're designed. This will be rethought. I think COVID's going to make us all rethink how it's done, but this is how it is today. Now, we've shown it here in the upper left-hand corner of this particular slide as a cloud. So this is what we call a cloud of visualization. Instead of showing you streamlines or path lines, I'm showing you fog effectively. And there's a few people here that are infected. You see them emitting out into the room, and it's filling up the room with this green fog. If you were able to see COVID-19, that's what you would see. You would see an increasingly foggy or smoky environment. Early on, we began to look at the effect of putting air cleaners in, particularly HEPA air cleaners. We knew this was going to occur because we're experts in, of course, HVAC and interior cooling and heating. We knew this would occur. We were wondering how to fix it. And so early on, by putting some air cleaners in, you see them sitting on the floor here. We put 6 into this room and we're able to drop the average concentration by over 50% by putting those air cleaners in, even with all of these people sick. So we began to think, okay, well, air cleaners look like they're going to be both necessary and important, because in order to have control over your local environment, you need to do something, be able to bring something in. Portable HEPA-based air cleaners, we thought, made good sense. And the industry has proven that to be true. This is a slide from the CDC and CBS News talking about improved ventilation, improving elementary schools. And you see here, they took a look at just improving ventilation alone. This means that they were pumping more outdoor air in compared to the base. The baseline's here at 1. And when they brought in just fresh air from the outside, things improved a lot. When they filtered the air, just filtered and didn't bring any outside air in, you got about the same effect. When you put them together, you get a cumulative effect. In other words, it doesn't matter whether it's fresh outside air or cleaned air through HEPA filtration, you've got to do one or the other, and in some cases, both. Now, the assumption here is that the outdoor air is clean. And in the state of California, when they're having wildfires, it's not clean. If you're living next to a busy street and there's diesel engines going up and down, this was in the paper today about Long Beach and the particulate going on in LA. If you're living anywhere near those tractor trailer trucks, outdoor ventilation is not the answer. Indoor ventilation is, or indoor cleaning through HEPA filtration. So, but they are additive. You can have one or the other or both. Now, that sort of turns to air cleaners. I just want to mention that air cleaners are an effective way to improve the environment. We got involved with the development of air cleaners as a result of all this modeling we were doing, and they are effective, particularly if they're well made. So some of these, you have to be careful because some of these people make claims that aren't good. What you want is a HEPA-based air filtration unit. That's important to have that word HEPA in there, and that it should be a device that works well. Ultraviolet radiation also works, but has to be implemented correctly. The way ultraviolet works is that it actually is a radiation. It's irradiating the pathogen itself and killing it. However, it needs something called the dwell time. It needs to be exposed to the pathogen long enough to kill it. So if the pathogen goes by it too fast, it doesn't have an effect. So implementation of UV is specific to the environment and has to be done well. We do know how to do it well. It's been around since the days of influenza, so we know it's effective. The question just becomes how to implement it correctly.
Paul, quick question for you on that, or actually two questions. One, does the ultraviolet do anything for particulates? Does it remove particulates that are not pathogens, for example, allergens like mold or other small particulates?
No, it does
Okay.
not. So for those of you who are allergy sufferers or asthmatic, UV doesn't help you at all. It really
Okay.
doesn't. Just killing the pathogen. Now it'll kill most pathogens. So it'll kill the common cold, and it'll kill influenza, and it'll kill COVID. So we're pretty comfortable that the spectrum is a killer, but it doesn't do anything for particulate. HEPA does both. HEPA will trap the particulate down well below anything that you need, well below 0.3 microns, down around 1.1 micron. It's very effective and has been shown to be effective many years. It's not a new technology. And it handles both cases, particles that cause triggers for allergies and asthma, as well as pathogens.
So definitely use HEPA. Is there any technology that you would suggest to everybody here that they stay away from?
Yeah, anything but those two. I mean, I would stay away from anything that doesn't have this, personally, my experience in this is go with what you know. Why would you do anything else? There are a lot of solutions out there that are claiming that they include this or has NASA technology in it or uses bipolar ionization or whatever. Those have not been proven to be effective. They haven't been around long enough. There hasn't been peer-reviewed studies on them. HEPA has. HEPA is the same thing we use in surgical ORs. It's the same thing we use in semiconductor clean rooms. You and I have done these kinds of things for years in these environments, model these environments. So go with what you know. Make sure it's HEPA. The HEPA filter in the units we make, as you know, Chris, are 3.5 inches thick. It's the same exact one we use in semiconductor clean rooms. So go with what you know, and don't be sold by novel or new or wait until the science is complete on it before you make a decision like that.
So those ones, the bipolar ionization, I think it was the president of ASHRAE who said that you want to steer clear of those until some evidence is in, and there's no evidence that they help. Is that
Yeah, they're actually being sued right now. GPS is being sued for misrepresentation of the facts. Yeah.
great?
And
Okay.
unfortunately, they sold a ton of them to the California school system. So yeah, that
Okay.
one's up for debate.
Thank you.
Now, I wanted to point out to you that it's not just me saying this about 2.5 and air cleaners and things like this. Here's an EPA statement, and it's a little long, but I want to just bring out a few points here, and I'll do it with my cursor. Air cleaners operated in homes consistently found statistically to reduce indoor exposures to PM2.5 and 10, and that studies have found significant associations between the introduction of an air cleaner and the improvement of at least one marker of improved health outcome. And with what we call a clean air delivery rate of within this range, in living rooms or bedrooms can substantially reduce concentrations of PM, both 2.5 and 10, and reduce them by 50%. Same thing our models are showing us. And they have been linked to reductions in allergy and asthmatic symptoms. So it's not just us making claims here. This is the EPA. These people don't say this easily, lightly. It's only after a tremendous amount of study that they would say something like this. So it is effective. It does work. We have both the EPA as well as anecdotal studies that show it. So here's how one of these things might work. This is an air cleaner. This is a generic air cleaner. It happens to be one we built, but in general, this is how they work. We put it in a room. We're modelers, so we can simulate this. We put it in a 20-foot by 15-foot room by 10 feet tall and see how it works. And what we find is that within a very short period of time, when we plotted it, you can see that the particulate drops like a rock as a function of time. So within 20 minutes, 60% of the particulate in that room are gone. 80% in 30 minutes. Boom, comes down very quickly, and less than 1% towards the end of it. I do have an animation sequence of this as well. I'll show you. This is how this particular device works. It shoots air out the top and just purges the room, so it flows up and around and circulates very quickly, drives down overall concentration by mixing. You want the room to be really mixed. So back to my earlier slide where you saw the multicolors. You won't see that here because it's going to uniformly drive everything down. So let me just set this animation up before I run it. So what we're doing here is we're starting with the room in a state that is fully filled with a pathogen, or in this case, it's a particulate. It's a 2.5 particulate. It's just not good. We have an even concentration of it throughout the entire room. And as we run the simulation, you'll watch that go from red to blue very quickly over the period of, this simulation runs for about an hour. That's an hour's elapsed time. And you see the room just dropping to be absolutely clean. And this is how they work. They're quite effective. Now, as we move forward, we need to think about indoor air quality sort of in a general state. And there's been work done on this. This paper over here on the right is called The Paradigm Shift to Combat Indoor Respiratory Infection. Ventilation systems must get better. So this is the design community over here that you're looking at. These people are all in the building sciences community, affiliated with ASHRAE and other organizations. Some of them are former presidents of ASHRAE. Others are university people who are coming out of some of the major schools, including Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, University of Colorado Boulder, Lawrence Berkeley Labs, these kinds of places. And they're saying that we need better indoor air quality to prepare ourselves for future pandemic diseases, as well as improve overall health in a building, human health in a building. It reduces the impact of seasonal effects like allergies, endemic diseases, and it will improve overall health, improve the economic output, and it is synergistic with other moves that we're making in the wellness space. So you see oftentimes, this is not my slide, this comes from, I believe this came probably out of Harvard's Chan School, Chris, is where probably this one came from. This looks like one of-
Yes, I believe so. The Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And they've done a lot of research. They're the ones, I think, Paul, who also did the research showing the improvements in productivity. So yeah.
Exactly correct, yeah.
Right.
There's a great book that's been written called Healthy Buildings. that I would encourage you to take a look at if you get a chance. But effectively, they're saying this is not just one component. This is we're talking here about ventilation, air quality, thermal health, moisture control. Humidity is important. Humans like between 40 and 60% relative humidity. If you get below 40%, we get grumpy. If you get above 60%, we get grumpy, and health declines in both those cases. When it's too dry, the pathogens float and they don't come down at all. When it's too wet, you get mold. So we like it between 40 and 60. There's, of course, dust and pets, safety, security. So there's a full complement of things that are necessary, 9 foundations of a healthy building. At the same time, the whole wellness movement is taking a look at us as humans and saying, well, there's a physical component, emotional component, environmental, that we're more productive if we work in an environment that is interesting and has some outdoor elements to it and has a nice environment, and we're socially comfortable and intellectually comfortable. And these things are beginning to work together. I like it. It is a movement in the right direction. It is a positive outcome of the effect of COVID-19. COVID-19 has been a horrible thing. We've lost 1 million people of COVID-19, or close to. But the result has been an awakening of the need to improve indoor air quality to the level that is necessary to make us healthy and productive as humans. However, there are some barriers. Scientific justification is not pervasive at all, persuasive to everyone. And we're a little schizophrenic in our country. It's kind of funny. We say we need to follow the science. We need to follow the science. It's all about the science. And then we take a backhoe and dig up the ground and pull out a rodent and ask him what the weather's going to be for the next 8 weeks. This is America. So we are a little schizophrenic with respect to scientific evidence at some time. And of course, the anti-masking and the antivirus, with country with vaccines the way we have them, to only have a 65% vaccination rate. Other countries are looking at us with questions about that. The economic justification is not understood by most. The productivity improvements that you gain from improved indoor air quality are still being digested by the people who have to spend the money to get it. There are split incentives as well. For example, the building owner themselves is incented to keep the costs as low as possible. That means don't run the HVAC equipment any more than they necessarily have to. That reduces the energy cost, but makes it a bad environment for the people who are leasing it. So the incentives have to be aligned up correctly. We need policy changes, and that's going to be challenging given our current political environment. Workforce education is an important part of what I hope we're doing today. And there is this increased sensitivity of professional liability. This is a double-edged sword in the case of liability. On one hand, the building owners in general want to make sure that they're making it comfortable for people to come back into the office. So that's a big component there. But the other side of it is they're nervous they're going to get sued because of a pathogen that gets transmitted in their environment, and they can prove it. So this is on both sides. On the offensive side is how I usually articulate it. Companies want to improve their environments so that people will come back into the office. On the defensive side, they want to improve their environments with monitoring technologies that measure the indoor air quality so that they can't be held liable in the case that something happens and they're accused of it happening in their environment. So there are two sides to that. And then, of course, there's this conflict with energy. Remember, the best thing that I can do, as I've told you, is flood the room with outdoor air. Well, when the outdoor air is 10 degrees and you're flooding the room with 10-degree air, you have to heat it up, and that takes a lot of energy. So there is a natural dichotomous pull between energy efficiency and indoor air quality. They're not on the same plane. They pull against one another, because in order to get good indoor air quality, you have to use more energy. Now, the most effective way to do it is filtration, indoor filtration, because you don't have to heat it up. But still, it takes energy and it takes money to put the filters in place. So there is a natural conflict here that is between the energy and the environment. So I want to leave time for answers, so I'm going to begin to summarize here and then open it up for questions. We like to make this as interactive as we can. We've been stuck in a paradigm here of trying to push for improved indoor air quality for for a long time. This has been around a lot. We've known this. Those of us in the building science community have known we've got issues with indoor air quality. Sick building syndrome is evidence of that. The fact that there's a name called sick building syndrome. But we haven't been able to convince anybody that it's important. COVID-19 did that for us. COVID-19 is the wake-up call for indoor air quality. And the good news about the solution is it affects not only pathogen transmission, but it also affects allergies and asthma and triggers like that. So we get effectively multiple solutions with one approach. Technology is well understood. It's been there a long time. HEPA filtration has been around for a very long time, and we know it works. The potential benefits are great, and there's a growing understanding. There's a growing understanding of the importance of indoor air quality in the general public, and I think that is a very, very healthy thing. Now, before you go, I want to give you something to sort of take with you, something that you can work in your own life. There are 4 things that I want you to be aware of as you enter a building. Be sensitive to these 4 when entering any indoor space. People. How many people are in the room? How many folks are there? Because remember, any one of them can be emitting a pathogen. And the more people there are there, the higher the probability that something like that has been going on. How close are they together? Because when you are closer to someone, it is true that the higher the concentration that you'll ingest of their outcoming air. So if they have a pathogen, the concentration is very high near them, and they're talking, and if you're too close to them, you're going to breathe it in. So how much space? People space, time. How long are you there? Duration makes a difference. So if you're there for a short period of time and you ingest something, the probability that you'll contract some kind of disease, cold, whatever from it is lower than if you're there for a longer period of time. So time is important. How long are you there? And place. Place is important. Look up. How tall is the ceiling? Remember, it comes out of our mouth and it floats up into the air and bounces off the ceiling and comes back down. It also lasts a long time. The half-life of COVID-19 pathogen is 1.1 hours. So it'll last a long time. It's going to be there. So if people have been there breathing for a long period of time, the room's going to be gray, if you could see it, or in our case, red, if you could see it, maybe orange. So people, space, time, place. It's a fairly easy thing to understand. You need to think about that. What's going on in the room? On the place side, are there air cleaners there? I was fortunate enough this weekend, my wife and I went away for an overnight. The hotel had air cleaners in it. They weren't very good ones, by the way. They weren't ours, but at least they were there. And there was the sense that they had recognized the need and spent the money to buy portable air cleaners. I thought it was good. So with that, I'd like to open up for questions. We've got about 10, maybe a little more, 15 minutes for questions. And I'd like to open it up for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. And the one thing I would like to add is, and obviously everybody who has been able to watch this has learned a lot, and this will be available as a slide. But we, Paul and I, are available for questions if people have specific questions about their particular environment. And we are also available to engage with your organization if you'd like us to do an air quality assessment and perform that for you. I'm going to put in the chat box a flyer that we have. ASHRAE, that organization that Paul was discussing, specifically calls out its standard, and they set a standard. It's a national standard called 62.1 for air quality. And we provide that service where you can have your organization request us to come in, and it's not expensive. It's amazing because you don't have to spend a lot of money, but you get a rundown of exactly where your air quality is and what you need to do to get it to the level where it would be more healthy. So I'll put that in the chat box. I'll hand it back over to Dr. Weiss and see if anybody has any questions.
Actually, I had a question. Thanks to both of you, Paul and Chris, for an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. I just picked up on what you said about the half-life of 1.1 hours, because there have been many discussions and not widespread agreement on all the means of transmission of COVID. But when you say the half-life of 1.1 hours in the air, did I understand you correctly that you could actually go into an empty room and be infected if somebody who was positive was in there within the last hour or so.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. And remember, it's 1.1 hours and we're continuously, if someone's infected, by the way, infection transmission occurs before symptoms. Okay, so it's pre-symptomatic. Is the highest transmission is pre-symptomatic. So the emission is happening. The person doesn't know they're sick. They're filling the room with it. And the half-life is 1.1 hour on the first particle. And of course, on the last particle, so the room is full of it. There was a case in a Korea restaurant that was documented and simulated. There's a case written about it with all the detail that shows that traveling salesperson came in who had COVID, left the restaurant. A young woman came in and sat over near the air conditioning unit, again, one of these ceiling fan coils, and it pushed all the air towards her, created a pocket like the one I showed you. She became affected. They only overlapped in time for 5 minutes and never touched one another and were never anywhere near one another. The answer is yes. You can become infected in a room without anyone even there, based on the fact they were there prior to your arrival.
It's very interesting because I've long wondered how my dad, who died of COVID a little over a year ago, got it, because he and my mother were in a senior residence where they were under strict quarantine. They couldn't do anything, but my dad liked to take a walk in the hallways and downstairs. And of course, there were people in senior residences coming and going. That would explain some of the deaths in nursing homes and senior residences where
Yes, it
people
does.
are on the premises. They aren't even allowed to leave, but they have staff and various people coming and going who could have brought it in, even if they're not in direct contact with them. So I think the air cleaners are a key piece. And also we need to keep wearing masks, even though, because unless we have very high quality air cleaners, because now many people are lightening up and not wearing masks most of the time. And I know I do, even if I'm walking outside, if I'm passing by people, I bring my mask up. I always have my mask under my chin. People make fun of me, but I got COVID about 2 months ago. I have no idea how I got it. I'm so careful. I wear gloves, but you know what? Maybe I picked it up that way. And because I was boosted, I had a very mild case. It was just a little cold. I had to get checked before I went somewhere, and that's how I found out I had it. I didn't even know I had it. But the transmission is very tricky. And you've just clarified one way that it is spread that people may not realize, because you think, oh, I didn't have contact with that person. They just left the room.
Yeah.
So that calls into question, how do we keep the rooms safe? Because you can't just stay at home for the rest of your life. So you guys have do a tremendous service. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. One of the things that comes to my mind when you say that is I will often go into, for example, a dentist's office or a place, and the staff they know that they're supposed to wear a mask, but they feel that if nobody else is there, they can take the mask off. And that's dangerous for both the staff and for other people if the staff are infectious. But if everybody has a clean air curtain or is paying attention to ventilation and indoor air quality, that is reduced. We're not going to change everybody to wear their mask properly and all the time, but awareness is kind of a key thing. So yeah, if they have a clean air curtain, then that would not be a problem.
I have another related question, and that is about animals. I've been reading recently in New York, deer are everywhere. I'm in Westchester County right now. And they say deer can transmit COVID. What about pets that go outside? I mean, I have a little indoor pet, but some people's animals, dogs, of course, go outside. Some cats go outside. Can they pick it up and transmit it? Do you know anything about that?
The conclusion on that is not solid at this point. We think that the answer is possibly yes, but we haven't been able to confirm it. It does depend on the animal, whether or not they can carry it. There's been some talk about certain animals being able to carry it. Deer, interestingly enough, was one that so. But again, remember that outdoors, the dilution is so high. Remember, this is a question of dilution. So we call it a viral load or a viral dose. How much concentration is getting into your lungs? Now, our physiologies are all different. Yours is different than mine. So it's going to react in your physiology a little different than me. So I can't predict whether or not you'll get it based on your physiology. But what we do know is that this viral load, the higher it is, the higher the concentration is, the higher the probability you will get it. So you want to knock down the concentration through either dilution or elimination of it through filtration, or preferably both. You want to knock down the concentration. That's why you don't want these, what we call dead spots in the room where there's no circulation at all. And it amazes me, I walk into buildings, public buildings, and the ventilation is off. The reason it's off is because it's controlled by a thermostat. So when the temperature gets a certain point, the air handlers will come on and it will blow air to cool you off or warm you up. Otherwise, it's down, it's off. Now, this is not good. This is not what we recommend. Part of the epidemic task force at ASHRAE that they put together suggests you run the fans all the time and only add heat or cool air to the mix when necessary, but keep the fans running. A lot of people haven't done it. So you walk into a room, it's dead and absolutely quiet. This means pathogens can build up. They have a half-life, as I mentioned, 1.1 hours. They last for a period of up to 12 hours before they're fully dead if someone's in a room speaking normally. So it's very important to pay attention to where you are, who's been there prior, how long have you been there. So that's why I gave you the little people, space, time, place. People, space, time, place. It's a nice little thing to remember. I sort of do it in my mind as I walk into a place. I look at how many people are there, how big is the room, how much spacing between people. We've become quite sensitive to it.
Thank you. I know we're just about out of time. Does anybody else have any questions for Paul or Chris? Feel free to email them also.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for
And I
having
just
us.
want to that the Paul and Chris's emails are in the chat, as well as links to our FAC membership form and FAC membership benefits, which include Air Cleaners Inc. benefits. So I would certainly encourage everyone to click those links and go to our website to learn some more.
Thank you, Ed.
And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much to all of you for attending, and thank you so much, Paul and Chris. That was really interesting and informative.
Yep.
Thank
You're very
you.
welcome.
Our
Please
pleasure.
have a good day.